So welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with some really wonderful colleagues and classmates to talk to you today about women in finance, women in the finance industry. So I'm going to briefly introduce the panel. I'm going to have each of these women talk a little bit about what they do and how they came to do that after Amherst. And then we'll move on with the discussion. So my name is Amy Fox. I'm class of 97, and I do not work in finance. I never have. But the reason I'm up here is that I am a screenwriter, and a few years ago, I was hired to write a film about women on Wall Street, a fiction film, not a documentary, a financial thriller in the vein of the Oliver Stone Wall Street or Margin Call. But the producers who hired me were really interested in the fact that Wall Street movies are very popular and they're very successful as a genre, but that they have almost never had any actual women characters who, certainly not women who we see working in that world. And so our mission was to tell an entertaining financial thriller, but one that just happens to have women in the main roles as the bankers, and also is a chance to examine what that world is like for those women in ways that it may or may not be like for their colleagues. So it's on that basis that I got the chance to be up here with these, with this esteemed panel. So I'm going to actually turn it to them, and if you would each just introduce yourself and what you do, and talk a little bit about your path of how you got there.
I get to start.
Angela Scott, class of 82.
Hello, I'm the lone wolf here. I'm the class of 82. My name is Angela Scott. I currently reside in Connecticut, and I've been in the financial services industry in one way or the other for about the last 20 years. Prior to that, I had worked in other manufacturing types of industries and also in government. My background, actually, from leaving Amherst is a little bit unusual for most Amherst folks. I went into human resources. And from human resources, I did eventually get my law degree, practiced employment law for a while, and then decided to move inside. Not so much to litigate or to defend, but more to prevent. I wound up doing a combination of employment law within HR to both explain compliance, explain regulatory requirements, but also do preventative work to stop some of the things that were happening within not only the financial services industry, but all industries along the way. My specialty area is equal employment opportunity and affirmative action. I currently do that for Wells Fargo. And I have done that work or employee relations work, preventative work at other companies, MassMutual, Cigna, and also through things like Sony and BF Goodrich.
Good morning. I'm Suzanne Santola Mulligan. I graduated in 97. I do investment banking, so when you watch the trailer, the lead character, Naomi, is an autobiography of myself in a lot of ways. I work at a firm called Guggenheim Securities, where I've been there for almost 5 years. I was hired to start the equity capital markets business there, which is the department that does the IPOs and the follow-ons. Prior to that, I was at Deutsche Bank. I ran their healthcare equity capital markets practice there for 8 years. I also co-led their private placement and pipes practice. And then I spent 8 years before that at Thomas Weisel Partners and Montgomery Securities. So 20 years right out of college, all in investment banking. I'm married to Greg Mulligan, who's in the middle there, and I have 2 daughters, Hayden and Finley, who are 8 and 6, who are also here. Hopefully you'll make it through.
We'll try to keep it interesting for you guys.
Good morning. I'm Molly Oth Manning, class of 97, and I've been in the investment world for 19 of the 20 years since I graduated from Amherst. And I'm on the buy side. I started in sales and client service on the buy side in New York, then moved to Boston and have worked in investment consulting, and then back again on the buy side for a broad, an asset allocation firm, and then now a fixed income firm. And now I have 5 kids. I have 3 stepsons, 2 little guys, one who is here joining me today. And it's an incredible balance to have kids and to try to do this, but it's a lot of fun too.
Hi, my name is Ashley McCormick Delahunty. I'm also a class of 97. I've actually been a lifer at Fidelity Investments. I joined right out of school and have had a lot of roles all within the equity trading division. I'm currently running a portfolio services team within equity trading. And like Molly, it's quite a balance. I also have 5 children, 2 stepdaughters, and then 3 little ones, one in the front row over here. Who didn't want to go visit the animals. But I think as Molly said, it's a juggling act with kids and work and marriage and life and all of the things above. But as Molly said, it's fun and it keeps it interesting.
Great, thank you. So what I wanted to do just to start us off is, because I think the topic of women in finance, we're gonna get into some thorny issues, some not so great statistics and experiences perhaps, and some good ones as well. But I wanted to start us off, if each of you, it feels a little bit like grade school, but I would love for each person to just take a couple minutes and talk about what is the aspect of their work that they enjoy the most. Because I think that, these words that when you describe your job title, for people that are not in finance, those may not mean so much. But I would love to just hear, what is it that gets everyone excited in their job?
I guess it's me. A little bit different from most folks, but I really enjoy making sure that people have a voice within corporations, making sure that people are treated correctly, and that if they have had issues, resolving them, finding a solution for them. That's where my passion comes from.
I like to win. In my part of the business, I spend most of my time trying to convince clients, companies, to hire my firm to be part of their IPO or their follow-on. So my greatest joy is when you spend all this time creating this presentation and getting to know the client, and then getting that phone call that says, yes, we think that you're the right one to lead the deal. That's certainly one of the things I like the best.
I also like to win. I'm competitive. I like to coach too. I coach my kids, but I think of my job at work a lot as coaching, so helping other people, put them in the right seats and give them the skills and the tools that they need to go out and help us win as a firm. And I love on the buy side, a lot of the clients I've worked with in the past are endowments and foundations, so like Amherst College. And I love the idea that we're helping them achieve their mission. So that's been a big part of where I've worked, what I've chosen to do, and the feeling I get of success and appreciation for what I do.
For me, actually, it's also about winning. It's in trading, it's every trade you've either won or you've lost, and it's very clear cut. It's very fast paced. It's very competitive. It's very aggressive, and I think that just keeps you going. And everything that sort of falls into the current events, and a news headline can change the direction of a stock instantly, and it's being able to sort of quickly being able to identify what that news headline is going to do to a stock, and being able to react to that and work with your team to get the best results is sort of the exciting thing for me that keeps me going every day.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is show the trailer for my film, which I think will echo some of these sentiments, actually. That was one thing that when I set about to kind of build this character who had been in investment banking for 20 years, we did a lot of research. Myself and my producers interviewed about 100 women and men that had worked on Wall Street. And that competitive sort of, I want to win, I want to succeed, I want to get the deal was something that we heard a lot, and that seems really important in terms of that drive. And it's interesting, a lot of the women we interviewed had a background in athletics. Were you all athletes at Amherst?
Yeah,
it seems. I was not, which is why I'm in the arts, but it seems like those things do go hand in hand. So let's watch the trailer, and then I will, what I'm going to do is talk about some of the themes that came up in my research, and then ask you all to reflect on some of those. So can we cue it up?
What's that thing that really makes you want to get up in the morning?
For me, I guess the simplest answer is I like money. I work for the largest investment bank in the world. I have taken 9 companies public. I am so glad that it's finally acceptable for women to talk about success. You still locking up drug dealers? I'm actually in white-collar crime. You got a file on us? We have a file on everyone.
I guess you've heard the talk.
They'll be naming a new global head.
I'm gonna be frank with you. The perception is that you rub people the wrong way.
Remind me why I didn't marry you.
Yeah, well, men like a girl they can take care of. I'm gonna take your company public. Are you ready to be the rock star?
Oh, yeah. Big smiles, we're gonna make a lot of money.
Well done. This thing is getting hot.
You guys went in on this now.
We just raised $250 million.
When Ed hits on you, you have to handle him professionally and very gently.
Yeah. I know how this works.
He give you anything on the hedge fund guy?
She's not gonna give us anything.
Now don't go doing anything rash. You're not in narcotics anymore.
Somebody leaked a rumor about my IPO.
I didn't do anything.
Yes, you did. Because you needed it.
You don't know what I need.
You have nothing on me, do you?
Is that a challenge?
You've been investigating him? I can't really comment on that. Did you leak this thing?
You wearing a wire?
It's all just a big game to you, isn't it?
What else is that?
Is there a problem?
This doesn't look like your year.
Secure? Yeah. Powerful? Absolutely. Don't let money be a dirty word.
So I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the things that came up in my interviews and my research, and then I'm going to sort of turn it over and hear if there's anything in what I say that echoes specific story or incident you guys want to address, and we'll kind of go from there. So a few things that came up when we interviewed many people. So it was interesting because within finance, there are very different environments. So we were specifically doing this film about the big banks, the big Wall Street banks, and that specific environment. And I do think that people in different roles in finance, the environments have some range and some specificity. We were also making a contemporary story, but many of the people I interviewed had actually started on Wall Street in the 80s or even earlier, and that's a slightly or maybe majorly different experience from what it is today as a woman. So we were interested in making a film about now, but also understanding the context. So one thing that came up, particularly with the people who had started in the 80s, but still goes on now, is the sort of very overt sexism or sexual harassment that you might hear about, sort of hopefully not as bad, but who knows, like a Fox News-like environment at some of these places. The kind of thing we might see in a movie like Wolf of Wall Street. And again, some sexual harassment, but also things like one of the women who executive produced our film started, the beginning of her career, she was told that the firm would not hire women for any job that involved travel because they were too delicate for that. So this kind of thing that was overt and policy at some of these places. And then obviously some of that has shifted and some of that has gone away and some of that has potentially gone underground or behind closed doors. So that was sort of one thing that I heard about from people. But beyond that, which I think is sort of the most obvious thing we think of when we think of sexism in the workplace, we heard about a lot of other things. We heard about the idea of perception and how women may be perceived differently at work. So you saw in the clip there where her manager says, "You rub people the wrong way." And there are certain phrases like that seem to come up a lot in performance reviews and in feedback that women employees may get, that they have sharp elbows, that they rub people the wrong way. These are sort of code words for too aggressive. And we heard a lot about people who had been in sort of closed-door discussions of performance reviews of women who would hear this idea that a woman is either too aggressive or she's too nice. And there doesn't seem to be a place for the sort of assertiveness that you need to succeed in this business that doesn't in some way work against you at some of these places. So that's one thing, that idea of sort of how you're perceived and how the same action taken by a man or a woman might look very differently to those around them. So that's one thing. Another biggie that some of you have already touched on is the sort of child pregnancy and child care piece. What happens when a woman decides to have a family? I'd be curious to hear from some of you. We talked to a lot of women who sort of hid their pregnancies until the very last moment, which is what one of the characters in the film does. The idea that you don't want that information out until the last possible second because it may change how you're perceived. And then also, the legitimate challenge of how you do a job that requires so much time, so many hours, such intensity, maybe travel, while also raising a family, and whether that does sort of work against you. So that being another theme. The whole idea also of work-life balance, which I found that many women I interviewed hated that phrase and didn't identify with the idea of a balance. That wasn't how they perceived it. And then just a couple other things. One thing that I found particularly interesting was hearing women talk about how they had internalized a lot of pressure and found ways that they were holding themselves back. So I heard a lot of people say that if a mistake is made, if someone doesn't perform well, that it's more likely that a woman will put that on herself, that she will lose sleep and think, how did I mess up? What could I have done differently? Be kind of up in the wee hours turning that over, and it's more likely that a man will blame it on someone else. And I was really interested in that because that, to me, is something that definitely transcends Wall Street and happens in my industry in film and writing quite a bit. So that's another thing I found really interesting. And then the last thing is, I've heard a little bit of this up here too, but one thing I loved about writing the film was sort of being able to give voice to women who are proud to declare that they want to make money, that they want power, that they want to win. As we heard, I don't think we hear women talk about those things quite enough. And that was one of the things that really struck me. In one of the first interviews I did for the film, there was a woman describing to me some pretty horrific things that had gone on in her office in the 80s involving strippers coming to the office, all sorts of things. And I said to her, what got you through that? What kept you coming to work every day? And I think I expected her to say something about character and resilience, and I don't know what I expected, but she just sort of paused, and then she said, I really like money. And it really took me aback. I just didn't know that I'd heard women declare a love of money in that way. And so I ended up working that into the film as something that, I was really interested in that, hearing that in a woman's voice and what that sounds like to people. And I asked these ladies in a phone call we did sort of about that. So that's another really interesting thing for women to feel comfortable talking about ambition, talking about goals in a way. And does that sound differently to us when it comes out of a female voice than a man? So those are the things that I've been toying with in writing this project, and also we've done a lot of screenings at banks and screenings in financial firms, and I've been on a lot of panels or handled a lot of panels like this. But I would love to turn it over to you, and I'd like to start with Angela from the HR perspective. Just what are the things that resonate for you?
Well, it's interesting because I'll look at it from both a personal and a professional perspective. First of all, most of the things that you've talked about are not unique to the financial services industry.
That is true.
That is true in virtually every industry, and I've been in a variety of different industries doing the same type of work. I mean, people are people. They screw up regardless of where you are. Or they get harassed regardless of where you are. So I find that doesn't make a difference as to what the industry is. And when you think about it, I graduated in the class of 1982. That was 35 years ago. That, in 1982, was when the EEOC actually defined and created, so to speak, a terminology of sexual harassment. That's the first time it was named, it was seen as something that somebody could potentially sue on, do something about. So if you think about it, that's not that long ago. And prior to that, there was no recourse for most women. Currently, now when you think back of it, when you're talking about, I do recall starting out in work with HR would never get invited to a sales conference because, oh my gosh, what happens there? The stories of the strippers, the stories of the friendly women that would be invited to join the events was such, and looking through expense reports post one of these conferences was always quite an unusual activity to see what things people had the audacity to not only do, but think that they could charge the company. I'm happy to say that that is not such a situation anymore. I do know that I went in one case, I actually cleared out 5 layers of management in one industry for sexual harassment. So there is a difference when you're given the power to say, I will institute change, and you do. You see that there's a difference in the work world in how people come to work. Now, having said that, in many of the companies I've worked at, there have been women in top leadership jobs. When you think about it, I think back to, in one case, this one woman ran a line of business, and she used to talk about, you wear your armor to work. For men, she said, we're in sales, we're doing our battle, and our battle means you wear your armor. Men, you have to wear your tie. That is your armor. Women, I expect suits. This was not that long ago. I was rather surprised about that, but as far as she was concerned, that's what she had to do. The other thing that's been a significant change is FMLA. I've heard people talk in terms of having children, what happens when you are pregnant at work. When I was pregnant, I had my daughter in 1990. Now I'm really dating myself. And I was the first professional woman to have a child at my organization at that point. And it was funny because other women came up to me and said, we're all watching you. We want to see what happens with you. We want to understand how they treat you. I was able to negotiate some time off and some time to work from home, but back then that was not a guarantee. It was a one-off type of experience that you had to work with. Later, a year later, my husband had developed cancer, again, no FMLA, and I had to, again, negotiate with my employer about how do I take time off, how do I deal with my situation, and they were very willing and able to work with me. But now those are rights that people they take for granted in many ways, where back in the day, that wasn't the case, and those were grounds for termination. Companies themselves financially are really making a change in looking at this as a dollars and cents issues. Women in top leadership, if you have women in top jobs, it produces a 30% higher return on equity. That's a dollars and cents issue. It's not so much a matter anymore of, well, this is a nice thing to do. It's now a matter of being able to trot out the numbers, being able to show, here's what the return on investment is for making sure you open your workways up to everyone. Unfortunately now for the financial services industry, there is a real challenge for women, for people of color within the industry, primarily because of the emphasis on the STEM careers. The STEM careers are siphoning off what used to be one of the major, women would go who are in the technology field, who are in the mathematics, who are in the finance field, would go into finance. Now they're finding there's alternatives with the STEM careers. And as a result, since 2000, there has been a 16% decline in women going into financial services. Now, unfortunately, that's versus an 8% decline for men going into financial services. So without that pipeline there, you're never going to have women in those top jobs. And that becomes a real issue. Because in order to institute change, you've got to have the pipeline there. Unfortunately, also within that pipeline, what we have found is that the higher up women get, typically they'll go into some of the so-called soft careers. They'll go into human resources. They'll go into the administrative services. They'll take themselves out of the operations mode. And that's partially because it's a way to deal with the work-life balance. Most of the women I know who are in senior management positions, who are heading up lines of business, especially if they're in the operations, if they're in the sales, have house husbands. That's the secret that most people don't talk about, is that most successful women actually have a husband who's a stay-at-home or who works out of their house. Now, that's anecdotally, I have to admit, I had one of those too. So, and it's your way you can balance the family, the commitment, and the who picks up the kids. So, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Susanna, does anything kind of gel for you in what we're talking about?
I often say at work that I need a wife. I don't have a stay-at-home husband, but I have a very supportive husband, and together I think we tackle everything as best we can. Oftentimes I feel like I'm not doing my job as well as I can, and not, being a parent as best as you can. It's, constant struggle every day. One thing that you had said about the sexism, I've been lucky that I haven't had any overt sexism, but certainly, or overt sexual harassment, anything like that. I've been fortunate that that's never been a problem. But the undertones, are always there. The first 10 years of my career, when I was an analyst or associate or VP, it was never really an issue at all. I feel like at those levels of your career, you get compensated based on like great work ethic and doing a good job and having a good attitude. But the moment I became in the level where you're compensated based on the revenue that you generate, totally different once that happened. Then all of a sudden, I've tried the head down and work really hard and let your results speak for yourself. And then that, is a nice pat on the back, but, you're not, doing as much as some of the other guys are doing. And then I've tried the, in your face meeting with the head of investment banking along the way to make sure he knew everything I was doing. And then I got the sort of like your comments in the movie, well, you're a little too aggressive, or, you're a little too showy, or, you're in my face too much. You should really, take a step back and let the results speak for themselves. So I feel like the men at the higher, and at my firm, by the way, I'm the only woman in a senior role, the only female managing director. Every Monday we have a SMD, MD meeting, and standing room only in the boardroom. Allergies are killing me right now. And I'm the only woman. There's no principal level women, there's no VP level women, and then we have, a bunch of the associate and the analysts. So they really don't know how to deal with me. So I deal with that a lot as well.
Yeah.
I grew up with 4 brothers, so I grew up with the attitude of like, I can do anything they can do, and they just pushed me around, and I thought that was going to make it fine. And for the most part, it is fine, and I find myself in that situation Suzanne just described all the time. And that part doesn't faze me. The sexism, it certainly happens. I mean, I was 23 and just trying to make my way at a firm in New York as an analyst, and my boss told me to take a client out to dinner. And I was worried. My thought was like, is my credit card going to be able to, cover this thing? I don't even know. Like, I probably had a $500 limit at that time. I'm like, how's this going to work? And he followed with, is it okay if I say, this is not really bad in front of your kids? He followed with, the woman who used to do this before, she got them laid. And I was like, oh, crap. Like, okay. And so I went to the dinner, because I didn't know what else to do. Took them out, and the whole time I'm thinking, I did not invite any. He said, bring some friends, because the last woman, she used to get them laid. And I didn't invite any friends. And I sat there and maybe had half a beer, and as soon as the waiter walked by, slid my card, paid for it, and ran away. Was like, I can't even function in this. And it gets better, and things like that aren't as bad, but it happens. This week I was talking with a colleague who reports to me, but about somebody else, and we were sort of gathering information, and she had, the other colleague had made a mistake, had sort of overshared in a client meeting. And he said, well, I attribute it to, she's a new mom. And I thought, would you say that about a new dad? Like, she's got a 5-month-old kid or something. Yes, I'm sure she's tired, but are we really still saying this? And I don't think that's finance, or I think that exists everywhere, but it's really frustrating, and it's, and Angela, you said something about how people, when you were pregnant, people said they were looking to you. I think that's huge. You know, having a group of people, friends, who are in your same boat going through it is huge. I mean, I give you credit. I can't imagine people who did it 10, 15 years before me, because how much harder it must have been. It's hard now, but how much harder it must have been without anybody, even, so you don't have anybody at your firm, but you have, you know, I'm sure you have a network of people that you can talk to and go to. Not having that, I think, would be, I don't know that I could have done it.
I think for me, you know, to echo that point, I am actually the only woman on the trading desk that has children, and anyone that had got pregnant actually didn't return to work. So I think when I was having my first child, which I actually had, I think I was like 37 or 38 when I had my first child, there was a lot of eyes on me, and there was a lot of pressure for me when I did come back to work on how people would view me. Being on a trading desk, you know, I think this sexism is definitely, you know, it's not as, it still exists. I think it's sort of behind closed doors, and I think in the, sort of like the first 15 years of my career, working on a trading desk, you know, you were going out, you were, you know, going to parties, and you were just trying to be one of the guys. And I also grew up with 3 brothers, so for me that was an easy transition for me. But I think now that, you know, I'm not going out and doing client events and going to parties because I have 3 young children, I think the perception of me on the trading desk has changed. And people have said to me, oh, now that you've had children, you've become soft. And for me, the one thing that I really remember about how I sort of survived all these years on a trading desk was never to let your emotions show, never let, you know, not to be soft, to be, you know, I'm not going to say this in front of the kids, but to be the bee, you know, and that's what you needed to do to survive. And I think that's, you know, what did help me, you know, make it on a trading desk and not be that statistic of all of the other women not being able to feel like they could have a family and work on a trading desk. So I just think it's, you know, back to the point of having an example. I wish I had examples of women that were able to do it, but now I sort of feel like it's on me to lead the way for younger women, to show them that they can have a family, you know, they can get married, they can have a family, they can do the balance, and it doesn't, you know, you don't have to be one of those stats.
That's really hard. I find that, you know, I've had colleagues and bosses say, we really want you to keep trying this. I know you feel like you're cutting corners. I know you feel like you're leaving early to go coach a kid's team or something, but you're the example. Keep doing that. And I love that, and I feel really, it's a huge responsibility, but I'm happy for that, and it's exhausting. It's super, you know, you do feel like, are you sure? Are you really sure you want me to do this? And everybody's looking at me like, is this okay? And it mostly feels great and sometimes feels awful.
When I went on maternity leave my second time, I was a revenue producer at the time. And on the way out, yes, with you, Finn, when I went out, my boss was like, have an amazing maternity leave. Don't worry, we'll take care of things here. But you know, any revenue that gets generated for your clients when you're not here, you can't really get credit for that.
Oh my God.
Literally the day I'm leaving. So I had Finn, and 4 days later, a client that I've been working on for a year decides to raise money. So 4 days into maternity leave, I call Greg, and I was like, do you hear anything? He was like, what? I don't hear anything. I was like, are you sure you don't hear anything? He was like, no. I was like, okay, I have to get on an org call right now, and I'm pumping, and I want to make sure that you can't hear it when I'm on the phone with the client. But 4 days in, I executed a full deal, you know, from the confines of my own home so I could make sure I got credit for the revenue.
My husband took a picture of me in the hospital with my second on the computer trying to answer, because I had him early and I wasn't totally ready, and I was trying to tie up some things and answer some emails. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I don't want to let it drop. And my company wasn't telling me I had to, but you don't want to drop that stuff either. It's hard.
It's funny because I think one of the lessons learned was you never want to let them see you sweat. That's the best way. You just would say, I can do that, no problem, get it done. Whether you're working till all hours in the evening, you go home, you feed your kids, you wind up putting them to bed, and then you start your second job of working at that point. So you do wind up with various issues that come up, but also as you're in these meetings, you learn to be almost impassive so that you don't see the emotion come one way or the other. And then in many cases, when you do finally show the emotion, it makes a bigger difference to them. When I had started out, I remember at one point, I was the first woman in this labor relations group, and the union did not know what to do with me. And they would actually start fighting amongst themselves about whether or not they could swear in front of me, what kinds of things I would or wouldn't know. They would go back and forth, and I just have to sit there and say, when you guys figure out what you're going to do, then I'll tell you what my ruling is on this case. But until then, and you start using it to your advantage. I'd say things like, you mean little old me could have done that work too? Oh yes, little lady, even you. So why are you suing us for whatever it was as preferred work? So you'll learn. And in many ways, I will admit, I would use that to my advantage. Figure if they're going to play the game, might as well do the same thing at times.
Yeah, so you guys have touched on a few things that I wanted to talk about. So one is this idea of role models, and I wanted to know who your role models were, and also you've already spoken a little bit about having to be a role model. And I guess specifically as people with children or people, in a setting, like if you were going to speak to some recent Amherst grads, would you encourage people to go into this field? So it's sort of a three-part question, but who were your role models, and were they men or women? And we've already heard a little bit, but what's it like to be a role model yourself? And then what might you say to a woman considering finance?
Yeah, I do a lot of recruiting of women, and I tell everybody, regardless, woman, man, blue, white, pink, you have to have a role model or a mentor. It was crucial for me in the first 10 years of my career. I was fortunate enough at 3 different firms to work for the same man. And I didn't even appreciate it at the time at what an amazing mentor and role model he was. He not only taught me everything I know, but he fought for me internally. And you would go to client meetings, and I would be 25 years old, and he would ask in front of the client, what's your opinion, Suzanne? So to get me involved in client interaction very early on, for a period of time, we didn't even live on the same coast. And if he would get a phone call, before he would pick up the phone call, he would call me in New York to get me on the phone to conference me in so that I could be a part of the conversation. When we no longer worked together after my first 10 years, and I had a new senior manager, I just assumed that was the way it was, right? And now Jeff was going to become my, conciliary and do all of those things for me. And I quickly learned that was not going to be the case. And I have actually struggled for the second 10 years of my career not having that role model or that mentor. So I tell junior people all the time that you need to have one, and I also say it's easier said than done. You can't wake up and say, okay, today on my list I'm going to get a mentor, and I'm going to blind email somebody and ask them if they'll do that. It doesn't work that way. It's way more nuanced, but being able to find somebody that you connect with early on is very, very important. And then in terms of would I encourage women to go into the field, I do strongly believe that investment banking coming out of college is arguably the best career path you can do for 3 years out of college. I think there's very few jobs where you are going to work that hard, but learn that diverse skill set, get as much responsibility, as much client interaction. And I do think having that on your resume early on can enable you to steer into 1,000 different directions. So I do still think it's a good career.
I guess I sort of had a different experience. I actually can't really think of a role model that I had at my firm, and I think that's very disappointing. But I think what I take from that is I sort of want to be the role model for a younger generation, and it's a tough balance, as I think you were very lucky to have a male role model, and I know they're out there. I just think it's a very different perspective. If you see a guy leaving to go to a soccer game, you say, oh, what a great dad, he's going to his kid's soccer game. But if I leave to go to a soccer game, I think the perception is, oh, she's leaving again early. She must not care about the job, or she, isn't giving it the 110% that she used to be able to give. So I think, companies like the one I work for, I think they say they want to set up mentors and set up role models, but until you find like that perfect fit, I think it's something really on paper and not really something that exists for me.
I had a great role model who, like Suzanne's boss, for the first 2 years that I was in the industry, invested in me and gave me a chance and took me on trips that I look back and I'm like, I don't know what the hell he was thinking, because I didn't know what I was doing. But it was awesome of him, and we still get together. But it was a pretty short sort of working relationship. My greatest role model is my mom. She worked for 30 years as a teacher, and she balanced it all, and she's phenomenal. So,
yeah, it's an interesting thing. Pretty much every woman that I interviewed who had stayed in finance and sort of really climbed up that ladder had a male mentor or sponsor who seemed to be really looking out for them and making it possible to bring them up and to support them. And it's an interesting thing when you talk about sort of, what men in finance can do to encourage and support. And I think that, now if you have more women in leadership, women can also do that. But for a long time, the women weren't in leadership. So you needed men who were willing to do that. And those who did, I think, made a tremendous difference on what the industry is starting to look like now. Great. We have just a few more minutes. I wonder if we should take some questions from the audience. Sure.
This theme runs, I think, very true to women in the law. I mean, I'm sure women in regular banking are this is very familiar. And but I always feel also that we're focusing a little bit on the negative. And I wanted to ask you, what have you found that you've been able to use as a woman or as an Amherst grad or to your advantage? I mean, what advice would you give that's worked for you, either from your family or your educational background, that's helped you succeed? And because clearly you've all done very well.
That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for turning it. When early on in the career, I always found myself that I stood out, right? Just physically, I looked different than the male in the white shirt and blue tie. When I went with a team from Thomas Weisel Partners to Deutsche Bank, and I was the junior person on the team at the time. There were 3 of us, and we went all over the firm to introduce ourselves to all the different industry groups and all the different, firm areas of the firm that we were going to work with. And I found that I was getting all of the inbound follow-up. And my boss, who was the same guy, by the way, but was joking a little bit, but a little bit not, and was like, why are they all calling you? Why aren't they calling me? I'm the boss. And I was like, because they don't remember who you are. They know who I am, right? I have a different name and I look different. So I use that. And now I absolutely use the advantage of being a woman when there's a woman on the other side. If it's a female CEO or a female CFO, there is definitely a club that women want other women to help succeed, and that's certainly an angle. And also, if it's a very aggressive male CEO, I find that they behave differently when there's a woman in the room. So if it's a difficult conversation or is going to be a very aggressive meeting for whatever reason, I find that I can diffuse the situation just by having a different perspective, different personality. Greg likes to tell people that I can get people to tell me things that other people can't. But I think that's, some of the differences of being a woman that I've used to my advantage.
Mm.
A few years ago, the founder of Fidelity decided to retire, and he turned over the operations and the CEO position to his daughter Abigail. And I'm curious, has there been any perceptible change that you've noticed in terms of the way things are at Fidelity under her guidance versus her dad's guidance?
I think she has a great team around her, and I think the difference that I'm noticing now is that they really are focusing on the younger generation and how to bring that younger generation in as clients. They're more focused on technology. They're more focused on cyber attacks. Mr. Johnson had his way of doing things, and he built the company to what it is now. But I think she's sort of realizing, how do you take the company to the next step? And you have to focus on the younger generation, and whether they do like TED Talks, and it's just a very different perspective. Even though she's not necessarily young herself, she's probably in her 50s, I would think. But the team that she's built around her and underneath her gives her a different perspective to lead the company in the direction she wants to take it.
50's young.
50's young, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the top 100 companies in America are now run by women. The CEOs are women. IBM, General Motors, Hewlett Packard. I mean, you go down to Lockheed. You go down the list. There's some very serious women in very serious positions. Do you think that's going to help in terms of providing more fluidity for women to advance? Or do they just stay away from that whole issue?
I think you find that the woman, if there is a woman CEO, there is a tendency to have more women flock to that business because they are anticipating that it may be a more open and community and more advantageous for promotion, for the ability to move through the ranks without having the stigma of being a woman or being an only. Whether or not that's actually the reality in many of these cases remains to be seen. In some of the cases you look at certain women who, prior CEOs, they took the tactic of, I will be successful by being as much like my male counterparts plus as possible. Others looked at it differently. So it goes down to really, I think, an issue of each individual style and how they manage and how they lead the company and the organization and what culture they set for that organization.
Yes.
I have three daughters, all of them are professionals in a little bit different areas that they face through taking conversations exactly the same pressures you described. You each are talking about being a role model. That's part of what your responsibility, your opportunity, and your joy is in this. And I guess my question is, as role models, do you see your opportunity to promote similar
Can I take a stab at this one? Sure. As a woman, as a person of color, when I first started out, people would always talk about assimilation. In fact, at one company I had, they had talked very strongly about diversity, about inclusion, but in reality, their culture and their practice was, okay, we've hired you because you're different, now be like everybody else and assimilate. What I found, for myself at least I can speak to, its transformation is what's critical. My very presence in many of these companies, my very presence in many of the rooms is transformative for people. It, in many cases, takes them a while to understand what I bring to the party or to listen to me in the same manner in which they may listen to other colleagues of theirs who may visually look similar. But once you break down those walls, you do find that there's an understanding then of the diversity of thought and creativity that comes from having differences in that room, and that there's different functional ways to look at things. So having people understand that not only transforms them within that organization, but also, I contend, transforms them outside of the company. In the majority of organizations, most people only meet and interact with people who are different than themselves at work. Our neighborhoods, for the most part, are still not always very well integrated, aren't very different. You meet people who are maybe in the same class as yourself outside of the work area. So what winds up happening is when you get into the work world, it's really an opportunity to experience differences and through that appreciate that. So I think it's transformational.
I really appreciate that. I feel, I would just say, I thought about this a lot too, because in the film, we explored a lot of the kind of darker side of some of these issues, and the film, spoiler alert, hope you will still see it, but it doesn't have a very cheery ending for our lead character. And a lot of times when we've screened it, particularly in settings where it's people in financial services, I'm asked the question sort of, well, how do you think this film would inspire women to go into finance? And the kind of subtext of that is, why are you focusing on the negatives if you want to inspire the next generation? And I came to respond to that by saying, maybe I'm trying to inspire the institutions to change instead of the individuals. I think that there's often a theme in this country of sort of feeling like individuals, it's on them to fit in, to assimilate to a system that may be in some ways broken. And I think that, institutions ought to be as capable of change as people. It's harder for institutions to change, but that's where I would like to see the onus for change on the institutions and less on individuals.
It's a good point, because the culture only changes from the top, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but it sounds like we're all saying similar things, which at least for me, it's like, I do my part, but look, I work for a boss that likes FaceTime, and he has a group of 10 people. The rest are all men, and they either have a stay-at-home mom, or they're not married, or they don't have kids. And I have spent the last 2 years educating him on the 21st century, and that I might not be at the desk, but have you ever had a client say they couldn't reach me? Have you ever not been able to reach me? Have I ever not responded to an email timely? Have I ever dropped the ball on anything? Have I ever not done as much business as everybody else, if not more than everyone in the group? And slowly, he's starting to realize that, yes, you have to adapt to the 21st century, but he also has to be the one, when I'm not there, and he hears his team making comments, to shut it down, right? And he's not encouraging that behavior, but he's not shutting it down yet. And I think, again, it comes from the top, and that's hopefully the next step.
Okay, we are at time. I thank you all so much.
I think we have 2 questions.
Yeah, I think we got to wrap up because there's someone else coming in the room. But thank you so much, and thank you to my panelists.
Thank you.